tonight, the collective is learning that corruption does not only live in thrones, temples, and feasts. It learns how to hide in language, law, ceremony, and polished smiles. This scroll opens the courtroom of the hidden world and reveals a chilling truth. Once the mask falls, the system will often rush to put truth itself on trial. The collective is not merely watching a court scene tonight. The collective is learning how false power survives exposure by renaming itself order, how manipulation wears sacred robes, and how real discernment begins when we stop mistaking titles for integrity. This is the lesson of the smiling knife. Not every judgment is just, not every law is clean, and not every holy voice serves the light. There comes a moment in every age when deception can no longer hide behind beauty, ritual, or official language. In that hour, truth does not always arrive dressed as comfort. Sometimes it enters laughing. Sometimes it enters exposing. Sometimes it enters like a blade of living fire cutting through silk, status, and carefully rehearsed innocence. Know this, collective. A corrupt system will often fear the honest witness more than the violent enemy, because the violent enemy can be named a monster, but the honest witness forces the room to see itself. When law protects appetite, when ceremony hides predation, and when order is used to silence the living soul, the sacred task is not obedience. It is discernment. For not all courts are built to protect the innocent. Not all judgments are born from wisdom, and not all smiles are signs of peace. Some smiles are only sheaths for knives. Tonight, the collective enters the chamber where truth is tested, power is watched, and the hidden ledgers begin to breathe.
Channeled by your architect musician, 36110, 27 palms of eyes. The golden whisperer, sea star, Devalan see all. Apply the news you can use, truth and accuracy. The real non-bedazzled jewels.
The Court of Smiling Knives. When the masks fell, the city built a courtroom to put truth on trial. There are few things more dangerous than a guilty city pretending to love justice. After the Feast of Masks, the Hall of Faces stood drenched in ruined glamour. Paint had run, titles had cracked, pearls had rolled into corners like frightened teeth. The holy frauds had been exposed, and for one shimmering second, the city had almost become honest. Then morning came. And with morning came committees. Nothing kills a clean revelation faster than important people forming a panel. By noon, the 9 keepers of continuity had called an emergency tribunal. Not to judge the corrupt, naturally. That would have been useful. No, they did what powerful cowards have done since the first thief invented a seal and a ledger. They accused the disturbance itself, Loki. The charge was elegant in its stupidity, inciting disorder by means of unauthorized truth. Humans can decorate nonsense so beautifully. The court stood on the eastern ridge of the city, carved from pale stone veined with black mineral that looked like dried lightning. The doors were tall enough to make ordinary people feel small before they even entered. That is the first function of most institutions of authority. They call it architecture. Sometimes it is just intimidation with columns. Inside, the chamber curved in a circle with balconies for nobles, alcoves for priests, benches for scribes, and a lower ring for citizens who wanted justice the way people want rain. Desperately, and rarely in the right season. At the center stood a silver platform shaped like an eye. That should have warned everyone. Loki entered unchained. This annoyed the court. The bailiff of oaths, a square man with a neck like a battering ram and a face like somebody had sculpted obedience from stale bread, raised his staff. The accused will show proper reverence. Loki looked around. To whom? A cough moved through the chamber. The presiding judge, Lady Seraphaline of the 7th Seal, sat high above the room in robes of deep blue and iron gray. Her face was hidden behind a thin veil threaded with silver. She was famous for wisdom, feared for discipline, and privately maintained by 3 blackmail networks and a vintner who never charged her. Civilization, apparently. She spoke without lifting her head. You stand before the court of harmonic balance. Loki smiled. Do I? It looks more like a laundering service for consequences. That landed in the public benches like a dropped blade. Several citizens looked down immediately, the way people do when truth walks too close to their rent money. Lady Seraphaline signaled for silence. You disrupted sacred order. I interrupted decorative corruption. You caused panic. I caused visibility. You humiliated the honorable. Loki laughed, low and sharp. No, I removed their curtains. If exposure humiliated them, perhaps the problem was not exposure. A scribe snapped his stylus. A priest in the upper balcony whispered, "Blasphemer." Loki turned. For the record, the gods are usually less offended by honesty than priests are. Priests have quarterly targets. Even the court clerk nearly smiled at that one before remembering employment was a fragile arrangement. The prosecution rose. Advocate Malrek, first tongue of the tribunal, was a long man in white robes with perfect hands and dead eyes. He had the look of someone who never sweated because he outsourced all risk to other people. His smile was gentle enough to be trusted by fools and empty enough to chill a dog. He bowed to the judge. The matter before us is plain. This being entered our holy city, corrupted a sacred feast, damaged relic property, incited class resentment, and fractured public confidence in our institutions. Loki tilted his head. Your institutions did that themselves. I merely provided lighting. Malrek continued, as though truth were a draft one could close with enough velvet. He wields mockery as if it were wisdom. Loki spread his hands. To be fair, in this city, mockery has had to do a lot of wisdom's work. A few citizens choked back laughter. The guards glared at them with the offended fury of men who are always one rank away from discovering they too are being used. Then Malrek called witnesses. That was where the theater began. First came Lord Vost, who swore the feast had been an innocent ceremonial gathering for the moral health of the city. He described himself as a steward of peace, a servant of the poor, a protector of stability. As he spoke, a widow in the public ring stood up and shouted, "You seized my brother's grain in winter." She was dragged out before the echo finished. The court recorded her as a disturbance. Then came High Priest єнαℓαη, who declared the temple had always welcomed the broken, the hungry, and the lost. A servant from the feast quietly muttered, "Only if they came jeweled." He too was removed. The court called it maintaining order. Funny thing about order, it usually means the right people get to lie without interruption. Loki watched all this with the mild expression of a cat observing birds organize a trial against the window. At last, Lady Seraphaline turned to him. "Have you no defense?" "I have several," Loki said. "But your court doesn't allow live animals, mirrors, or unscripted testimony, so I'll have to simplify." A ripple moved through the room. He stepped onto the silver eye platform, and for the first time the chamber seemed uncertain of itself. The metal beneath his feet brightened, then dimmed, like it was struggling with a conflict no one had informed it about. Loki lifted his gaze to the balconies. "You say I disrupted confidence. Good. Confidence in what? In judges bought by secrecy? In priests fed by staged holiness? In nobles who call extraction stewardship? In tribunals where witnesses vanish faster than evidence?" Malrek snapped. "Speculation." Loki turned. "No. Pattern." Then he pointed, not wildly, not dramatically, just enough. "At dawn, your clerk burned 2 pages from the registry." The clerk went white. "To your left, the bailiff carries 3 oath rings and has broken all of them." The bailiff gripped his staff harder. "Lord Vost has 6 tenant houses titled in his cousin's name to avoid tax assessments." Lord Vost stopped breathing for a heroic second. High Priest єнαℓαη keeps a private chamber behind the West Sanctuary where donations become wine, and wine becomes revelation. The priest made the mistake of looking offended instead of surprised. "And Advocate Malrek," Loki said, voice now almost tender, "has built an entire career translating predation into procedure." The room trembled. Not physically, morally, which is worse. Malrek stepped forward, face tightening for the first time. "These are unfounded accusations." Loki smiled. "Then let the court examine its own records." Silence. No one moved. Because there it was, sitting in the middle of the chamber like a wolf in silk. The entire institution depended on review being for the powerless. The minute scrutiny climbed upward. Everybody developed concerns about process. Lady Seraphaline finally spoke. "The court is not on trial." Loki looked straight at her veil. That is exactly when a court most needs to be. That line hit like a thrown stone. Clean. Final. Terrible. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, though the sky had been clear all morning. The silver platform under Loki's feet cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. A single dark line spread through the eye-shaped dais, then another, until the symbol of sight beneath him looked wounded by its own refusal to see. From the highest balcony came a laugh. Not pleasant, not loud, just one sharp little sound. It was the pomegranate girl from the feast. She had entered wearing plain clothes and stood now among the citizens, unmasked as ever, holding a bundle of court records tied in red cord. Everyone turned. She raised the papers. "I found the missing pages," she said. "Human institutions truly do hate women with documents." Malrek shouted for the guards, but the citizens had already stood, not as a mob, as memory, as consequence, as the slow, unbearable return of backbone. The girl tossed the records onto the silver platform. Pages broke open across the crack like white birds. Names, payments, seals, property transfers, oath revisions, protected families, purchased verdicts, quiet burials, public lies with private signatures, receipts, the ugliest magic in the world. No spell on earth terrifies corruption like paperwork that survived the fire. Lady Seraphiline stared down for a long moment. The whole court waited. Here was the hinge, the blade edge, the place where a person discovers whether their title has eaten their soul or merely rented it. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. "Clear the balconies," she said. No one moved. Then louder. "Clear the balconies. Seal the doors. This court will examine the record." Shock spread faster than plague. Malrek went cold. Vost swore. Inarel began praying to a god who, by all appearances, had chosen that morning to let him freestyle. Loki just grinned. There it was. The thing corruption fears most. Not noise, not outrage, not even exposure. Precedent. Because once one court chooses to look upward, every ceiling in the kingdom starts sweating. Lady Seraphiline rose. "Advocate Malrek," she said, "you will surrender your seals pending inquiry." "Your Honor, this is madness." "No," she said. "This is review. Madness is what we called governance." Even Loki blinked at that. Respect, rare and mean, passed briefly across his face. The citizens did not cheer. That would have been too easy, too theatrical, too early. They watched, because wise people know the hearing is not the healing. The indictment is not the cleansing. The speech is not the repair. Humans love clapping at the doorway and then wandering off before the rebuilding starts. That is how rot returns wearing new language. Loki stepped off the cracked silver eye. As guards moved now not against the weak, but against the insulated, he walked toward the doors with the lazy grace of a fire that has already chosen its wall. The pomegranate girl called after him. "You're leaving?" He glanced back. "No," he said. "I'm making it impossible for them to pretend this was only about me." Then he smiled, that wicked, narrow smile of his, the one that always means somebody's polished story is about to have a very bad season. "At last," he said, "the knives are facing the right direction." And so the court of smiling knives began, not as justice completed, as justice embarrassed into movement, which, sadly, is how it often starts. And the hidden wisdom of the scroll moved through the city like a rumor too true to kill. When the law refuses to examine itself, it becomes costume. When procedure protects hunger, the robe is just another mask. And when truth enters the courtroom laughing, the guilty suddenly remember how sacred order is. That is because sacred order, in the mouths of predators, usually means this: "Please sit down while we continue eating." But the collective knows better. Sometimes the holiest sound in a corrupt court is the crack in the floor. Sometimes the most merciful act is forcing the knife to smile at its owner, and sometimes Loki does not burn the building down. He leaves it standing long enough for every hidden ledger to crawl into the light. That is crueler. That is funnier. That is justice beginning to wake up. Receipts. This scroll is a creative expansion, not a literal chapter from the Eddas. Its backbone comes from Lokasenna in the Poetic Edda, where Loki enters Aegir's hall uninvited and unleashes a brutal public verbal attack on the gods, exposing their faults in a feast setting. The sharper, Loki as the one who makes the room visible, current comes from how he is described across Norse tradition. A cunning trickster, a shapeshifter, companion to the gods at times and their problem at others. The courtroom layer in this scroll is an artistic escalation, but it is grounded in real Norse social structure. Medieval Scandinavian societies used things, public assemblies that handled law, governance, and disputes. That is the legal skeleton under the Court of Smiling Knives mood. So the feast comes from the myth, the exposure comes from Loki's old function, and the tribunal atmosphere borrows from the Norse assembly world. The rest is the scroll sharpening its blade because apparently corruption never runs out of costumes. When the mask falls, the system will often accuse the mirror. When truth enters the room, false order suddenly becomes very emotional. Not every court protects justice. Some protect reputation with better furniture. Not every holy voice serves the light. Some are only appetite dressed for ceremony. Remember this. Collective. If exposure destroys a throne, the throne was already cracked. If honesty shakes a temple, the shaking is part of the cleansing. And if a smiling knife calls itself peace, do not lean on it. Truth does not fear review. Only performance does.
Until next time, your C-Star Curacy, channeled by 361-1027, the Beautiful Whisperer. Our C-Star Devalan CO. Apply the news you can use.
The collective walked into a courtroom where polished evil tried to put truth on trial and call it order. The lesson was sharp. Once corruption is exposed, it rarely surrenders with dignity. It reorganizes, it drafts statements, it hides behind law, ritual, and official language, hoping the people will bow to the performance again. But this scroll showed the deeper game. The real danger was never only the liar. It was the system that kept handing the liar a robe, a title, and a platform. Loki did not just embarrass the court. He revealed that many institutions do not collapse because truth is weak, but because truth finally stopped whispering and walked in with receipts. There is an old pattern in this world. When false power is cornered, it does not confess, it performs. It calls itself balance, duty, peace, law, tradition, sacred order. But the collective must learn to hear beneath the language. For words can be washed, titles can be polished, and systems can dress their hunger in white robes and call it civilization. Know this. A corrupt court fears the witness more than the criminal. A false priest fears discernment more than sin. A dishonest ruler fears memory more than rebellion. Why? Because rebellion can be crushed, but awakened sight is much harder to chain. The hidden wisdom of tonight's scroll is this. Do not be seduced by structures that demand your obedience while refusing self-examination. Anything that calls itself sacred but trembles when asked for truth is not standing in divine order. It is standing in protection of its own appetite. So let the collective remember, if the law cannot look at itself, it has become costume. If the temple protects corruption, the altar is already cracked. And if truth is treated like the criminal, then the room has told you exactly who it serves.
To our beautiful collective, from our day ones to every new soul joining this journey, we love and appreciate you deeply. You've turned this space into so much more than a community, you've made it a family. Thank you, truly. Your presence, your energy, and even the smallest acts of kindness have the power to shift the compass for many in ways unseen but deeply felt. Here's to each of you, old, new, and the many more to come. We're just getting started, and we're so grateful you're here with us. With love and infinite appreciation from the collective of Shaman Ahll.
The Ninth Court demands truth. The veil cannot hide these breaches.
Truth is a double-edged sword, sorceress. What do you seek?
Justice for Yggdrasil. The pact was broken.
Then let the argument unfold.